So today's video slash lecture is going to be on personality types, specifically MBTI types, but we can also talk about things like Big Five if that happens to come up. Love, attraction, these sorts of things. You know, types compatibility with each other. It doesn't necessarily have to be romantic compatibility, but today the topic is generally going to be how can types get along with one another? I want to take this topic from a multifaceted approach, though. I don't want to just talk about the important or the aspect that personality plays in compatibility, because I think that romantic compatibility and friendship compatibility goes far beyond just personality type, though personality type is one of the aspects that can make up what is likely to make people compatible with one another. Hello, I see someone joined. If you're in the chat, hello. How's it going? Having my caffeine before we start. Okay, so with that said, how does compatibility tend to work in personality people, just in people in general? How do people get along with each other? What makes people more drawn to each other? Well, there's quite a few things, and what might be surprising to many is that personality is only one of these things, and it's actually one of the ones that, while important, may not be one of the key leading factors. It's the one that we tend to notice the most, but it's not actually the thing that might be the largest factor in what causes us to be drawn towards another person. So let's go over... Oh, hey, how's it going there? The hi with the two letters. So let's go over general attraction theory real quick, and then we'll kind of move from there. I was kind of waiting to see if anybody else was going to join real quick before I jumped too hard into this, so let's give it another 30 seconds or so, and then if nobody else is here, I'll go ahead and jump into that. How you doing there, though? Master M? Having a good day so far? All right, well, I don't think anyone else is going to hop in right now. They'll probably join later if they do. Today's been great. Cool. Let's get into it. Well, you get to be the sole viewer of the lecture, the stream. So if you have any questions, feel free to ask them. I'll be more than happy to take a stop on the road. But for now, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So I actually was a teaching assistant for social psychology for 4 semesters. And in social psychology, things like relationships and compatibility is actually one of the largest topics that is frequently covered when we talk a little bit about what causes people to be drawn towards each other. There's a few different attraction theories that encompass what people think about the field of attraction, essentially how theorists, psychologists think about attraction. And one of the most prevalent one is the five factor relationship attraction theory. And this proposes the idea that there are 5 key factors that lead to a personality or person. Hold on, I'm gonna get a little light because I can tell that my screen gets dark. So let me get a light here and we'll go from there. Blinding me. Blinding. Sorry about that. Hey, Treatone, how's it going? Hey, everyone who just joined. I'll catch you up in just a second. I'm just getting a light because my screen's dark. All right, working and listening. Okay, well, let me catch everyone else since a few people joined at one time. Today, we're going to be talking about type compatibility, MBTI types, personality types, what causes them to kind of fall in... Or not, I don't want to just say love, because we're not going to just be talking about love. We're going to be talking about general friendship and compatibility as well. And I briefly mentioned before that today we're not going to be just looking at what personality type has to do with attraction. We're going to be looking at the kind of meta proponents and meta factors that make up attraction, and then seeing how personality type falls into that. As you see right here on screen, and I'm going to zoom this in, so give me a sec here. Control plus, if I remember. Yeah, Control plus. This is one of the primary attraction theories in psychology, and it proposes that there's 5 factors throughout research that are likely to lead towards people developing a relationship or friendship with each other. Similarity, proximity, reinforcement, physical attractiveness, and personality. Now you'll notice that personality is only one of these 5 factors. And what is interesting about this is you can easily develop a friendship or even a relationship if you only had a few of these things and personality wasn't included in that list. So, for example, if you were very similar to someone and your relationship was very much positively reinforced and you found them attractive, even if you weren't a huge fan of their personality and, your proximity wasn't, super close, maybe you're a distance relationship or something, you could still develop a relationship. Or you could like their personality a lot, be in close proximity, but maybe you're not very similar. Maybe you're not very similar to this other person. You could develop a relationship or friendship with this person. Now, I think you're going to find that when it comes to friendships, certain ones of these are going to stand out above the other. So, for example, similarity and personality are the two that are going to be the most likely for a friendship to evolve. You don't need proximity to be a friend with somebody anymore. You don't need much reinforcement, and you certainly don't need to see them as physically attractive, although some people do have that as a requirement for who they're likely to take on as a friend. They don't want to be seen with people who are, less attractive than them if that's something that they care about, for example. When it comes to romantic relationships, personality tends to be one of the most important ones. Proximity also tends to be more important because while long distance relationships can work, they're like 10 times more likely to fail. I don't know exactly what the statistic is. Don't take that as a fact. I just know that they are on average more likely to fail. So what's important about this? Well, MBTI, Big Five, all of these things exist within the single facet of personality. So if we're going to talk about how personality type can relate to compatibility and love, we have to recognize the fact that it is only a single facet of attraction, relationship, and compatibility, and it is not sufficient to make up the entire connection that you have with another person. It can be a huge factor, but it is not going to be enough on its own for you to be attracted to someone else, which I think is one of the flaws that people have when they're attempting to look at MBTI in terms of compatibility in relationships, is they fail to recognize that you can easily have a relationship without the aspect of personality being one of the key factors of why you're interested in someone. So that said, let's go into the personality aspect, and talk about what is important, why it can be useful to have a very similar or interesting personality to the person that you are interested in or interacting with. Now, similarity and personality can also be two things that are connected to each other in this theory. So if you have a similar personality to someone, you hold some sort of similarity with them, maybe it reinforces the idea that you want to be in a relationship with them. But at the same time, you could easily be just as interested in someone for their personality because they're not similar to you. And therefore, that similarity might actually be a bit of something you're not terribly interested in. This is why we have types like the INFPs who tend to be very interested in like ESTJs or ENTJs, who tend to be interested in the very business-heavy, authoritarian type of people, commanding. They're very opposite end of the spectrum in that regard. And both of these types tend to be somewhat drawn towards each other, even if they're not very similar. Now, that said, you can just as easily have an ENTJ who's interested in, say, for example, another ENTJ or another NT type in general. Can I explain reinforcement or maybe quickly go over all 5 factors? Yeah, sure. So I'll do that then. I'll go down the list and talk about these before I go into personality type in relation to these things. So similarity is going to be the reference to, of course, how similar you are with the other person. Now, what does this mean? What does it mean to be similar? Well, it could be attraction. It could be race, even in some terms. While it's not something that we would want to say openly as a statistic, people are far more likely to date and marry within their own racial and cultural groups as opposed to outside of these groups. So similarity can play into these sorts of things. But it can also play into other aspects that you might not even be entirely aware of, such as age. Age is something that is important when it comes to similarity. The further you are different in terms of age, the more likely you are for your relationship to fail in the long run. Now, this tends to only become a problem at about 10 years. After a gap of about 10 years, the similarity aspect of age can become an issue. But before that, it's not terribly much an issue. See, for example, people who are 20 years apart very rarely hold relationships unless there's some sort of other binding factor there. Say, for example, like a individual who's very wealthy who has taken on a younger person in this kind of weird, dependent relationship. Another thing that is important for similarity is subculture. So culture is extremely important, but it's not enough. So say, for example, if you're an American, it's not enough for somebody else to be an American. And especially because you live in America, or if you do live in America, it's a melting pot of cultures. So therefore, your subculture within that culture is going to be something that's very important for you. In many other nations around the world, there's primary cultures, and that primary culture, while it does have subcultures, the subcultures aren't exactly extremely different. They're more like children of the dominant culture. Where in America, it's more like you just have these very scattered and random subcultures that aren't exactly inherent to the dominant American identity. Say, for example, being goth, emo, scene, punk. These are examples of subcultures that could be important when you're talking about similarity and attraction. And this is going to be something that's important for many people. You know, if you're somebody with the identity of goth, for example, or the identity of punk, you might only be interested in somebody who has that subculture as well. It could be one of the key factors that relates to your relationship or what you find interesting or attractive, essentially. The age depends on the age. The lower your age, the more the age difference is going to matter. I'm 23. I can't imagine dating a 13 to 17-year-old. Well, yeah, I mean, and there's also legal requirements for where you're from. It really just depends also on maturity as well. Again, the age factor of 10 years is what tends to be shown as the rough cutoff for what's likely to work in the long run. Now, there's people who make it work. You know, I'm not saying it's just an immediate doomed to fail, but the further apart you go, the more trouble you're going to have is generally what I'm saying there. So back to subculture. Where was I going? So there's a phrase in social psychology, or there's two phrases. There's opposites attract, and then birds of a feather flock together. Now, research has shown very, very clearly, despite what society, culture, movies tends to show, that birds of a feather flock together. And that means that people who are similar are far more likely to end up in relationships with one another compared to people who are different. And you might find that you think that you're very different from someone that you're with or in a relationship with, but then you look at it from a meta or macro level, and the differences are very small on a global scale. Now, people who are very different might be attracted to each other because of their differences, the whole opposites attract thing. But in reality, opposites attract was actually proven in research to very much not so be true, and that opposites initially attract and then they clash. They come towards each other, then they clash with each other. Maybe there's some fierce intensity, relationship, friendship for a while, and then there's usually an extreme division at some point that separates them. And again, this isn't going to be a universal law. We're just talking about the general trends, which when you're talking about psychology, almost everything is a trend and not a law. In fact, I would say everything is a trend as opposed to a law. It's bad psychology to assume something is a law because psychology is ever diverse. So those are the general components that make up similarity. Also, things like personal value can be extremely important, like what do you think is important? But I think that goes back into culture and subculture. So let's talk about proximity. Proximity is probably the easiest one. Well, what does proximity mean? The distance between you and them. The closer you are to someone, the more likely you are to end up in a relationship with them or develop feelings for them, these sorts of things. When you're in high school, the only people you can develop relationships with, for the most part, are people in your class. You can't develop relationships with people easily with someone from another high school unless you met on, like Instagram or something like that. The further away you are, the harder it is for you to develop a relationship or attraction for somebody, and the more steps there's going to be in maintaining that relationship and making sure that it works in the long run. So I think that one's pretty simple, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. Now, reinforcement is generally like how much positive general reinforcement is there in the relationship or the communication that you're having with each other. Are you building each other up? Are you building upon each other? Are both of you kind of interested in the friendship and the relationship? Are you both committing a decent amount of time into the relationship? Are you both playing your part, essentially? Now, this can be a one-sided street in that one person needs reinforcement and the other person really doesn't see reinforcement as something that they need. They're, maybe the more independent type of individuals. And it can be something that as long as the person who needs the reinforcement is getting enough of it, they're generally going to be satisfied. So just think of reinforcement as the effort in which you're going to be putting into a relationship, or the effort in that you are going to be trying to keep in touch with the other person. So, for example, it's hard to be friends with somebody who never texts you back, right? Like, even if you want to be friends with them, if you text them and they just leave you hanging for a week, even if they care about you, as long as if they're not interacting with a relationship, you're not going to be able to develop and build more of a relationship with them. That's what the reinforcement aspect is implying, is that you have to be communicating and kind of being in general contact and reinforcing the relationship upon itself over time. I think physical attractiveness is probably the easiest one. Now that I thought proximity would be the easiest one, but physical attractiveness is the one that makes the most sense, right? But again, looking at this, remember with relationship theories and attractiveness theories, physical attractiveness doesn't have to be a component of compatibility. It doesn't have to be one of the things that leads to you being attracted to someone else. You could easily have all four of the other things and not have physical attractiveness and develop romantic feelings for somebody. And there's plenty of relationships out there where that is the case. Maybe you're not extremely physically attracted to someone, but you still develop feelings for them because of their personality, because your similarities, because you have the same culture, because you're both positively reinforcing the relationships. And usually that romantic relationship will then lead to a general physical attractiveness over time. So even if somebody isn't your type, you can still have feelings for them and find them attractive as a person. Physical attractiveness only refers to the attractiveness of their body, their characteristics, as opposed to the attractiveness of themselves as an individual, as a person. So that leads us through the four and then back down to personality. And as we talked about with personality is a single aspect that makes up what it means to be attracted to someone. And then 16 types, MBTI, Big Five, all of these things fall within the realm of personality. So all of these things are a single component of being attracted to someone. And that's why it's so important to remember this, and remember this when you're thinking about and talking about relationships, theories, these sorts of things. So now that I said that, I would like to go back into talking about the types and how they can be influenced by each other, and how each type is going to maybe find another type attractive. So there already is a general theory about this proposed in the MBTI Foundation, in like the manuals, statistic manuals, and all that. Well, no, I don't think it's in the manuals, but it's in the training course. And it's called the type house. And it's just a general diagram that shows you how likely a type is to be attracted to another type. And I'll go find that right now and talk about it. Here it is. So this diagram created, I don't know if this exact model, but I know that the types were in the right order. Created by the MBTI Foundation is essentially which types are more likely to get along with each other naturally. Now remember, personality is a single component, so it only means which types are more likely to naturally get along with each other. The closer you are to another type in this house, the more likely you are to naturally be able to communicate with them, be able to kind of find things in common. Now, there's a few themes that stand out very quickly if you are if you're looking at this correctly. So the thing that stands out to me at first is that the TJ types, all four TJs, occupy the corners of the personality house. And what that means is that all of the TJ types tend to be quite far from each other in terms of their likelihood of getting along naturally. And you might be able to think to yourself, why would all the TJ types struggle maybe with getting along, compatibility, especially in relationships? Well, you very rarely find two TJs in relationships with each other. It can happen, of course. Remember, we're talking about general trends, not the absolutes here. But it's because TJs tend to be the types who are most likely to enforce their own ideas or want to enforce their way of doing things. And therefore, if you have two TJs who both want to enforce their way of doing things, you're going to have some issues. You're going to have times where, the INTJ wants to say, hey, let's do things my way. Meanwhile, the ESTJ on the complete opposite end of the spectrum says, I want to do things my way, but I also want to do it through the lens of introverted sensing. And then you're just going to have this complete clash. So that's why the TJ types occupy the corner of the type house. They're the least likely to naturally get along, especially in longer term relationships, things like romantic relationships. Can it happen? Yes. Remember, we're not talking about absolutes. We're talking about trends. I would say that the ISTJ and the ENTJ are oppositional to each other, while the INTJ and ESTJ are oppositional to each other. The INTJ and ENTJ can get along kind of, just like how the INTJ and ISTJ can get along kind of. The ones that are to the sides and not diagonal down across are going to have at least some aspect of compatibility. But you would find that there would be difficulty if they tried to translate it into anything more than a friendship. On average, again. So now, which types are very likely to just get along naturally? Well, I have some gripes with this chart, some that I'm not 100%. I understand the theory and how they got to the conclusions they did. So when we talk about types, we often have types that we naturally prefer. So if you're an INTJ or an ENTJ, what types are you most likely to naturally prefer? Well, I mean, or at least gravitate towards. Preference and gravitation towards tend to be similar things, but not exactly the same. So if you're an INTJ, you're probably around a lot of INTPs. That one makes sense to me, right? You're on the internet, you're going to be in the same situation as many INTPs, you're going to be interested in kind of theoretical, technical things. You're at least going to be, yeah, right, and other NTs, NIDOM, other NTs. Makes sense. Now, at the same time, you'll often find that INTJs and INTPs can get very frustrated with each other from a function point of view. While they get along from a dichotomous point of view, as soon as they start to actually talk about and interact with things from a perspective of function, there's going to be clashes because they have two extremely different ways of communicating and taking in information. NITE and TINE, excuse me. And these things can conflict with each other when they're trying to communicate, especially when they get into arguments. If you've ever seen an ENTJ and an INTP get into an argument, it's just like it never ends. It goes on and on. Sorry, I need my caffeine. So that's something that has to be taken into account when you're talking about relationships and things of that nature. Let me. Whoops, sorry. I tried to zoom, and that I don't want to print. I want to zoom. Sorry, I hit the wrong button. Sorry. Maybe you can get a little bit of a better view there. Okay, so yes, back to where I was. There's going to be types that have general tendencies towards each other because of the more dichotomous nature, but I think on the dichotomy level, you'll see temperamental similarities. And what I mean by that is, for example, the NTs are going to be interested in NT things, even if they have a different way of going about it, which can create camaraderie and compatibility. But when you look at it from a function perspective, it can be difficult. Let me open up a notepad here. So I'm going to drag that on over here, skinny it. So NTs can get along on the NT level, but might struggle due to functions. So this is just going to be an example. You can apply this to any of the temperaments. So NTs can get along on the NT level, but they might struggle due to functions. INTP and INTJ. So for you, you'd say INTJ, INTP, ENTJ, INFJ, ENFP, ENFJ, ENTP in that order, and ISTJ somewhere in there. Right. So you'll notice, for example, that whole list is pretty much intuitive types. And the perceiving action axis tends to be one that we have a bias towards, I would say. It's very much the one that I think people they underestimate the other side. So intuitives tend to really, really, really underestimate sensing types, like extremely underestimate the sensing types, just as the sensing types tend to ignore the interests of intuitives or not be aware of the interests of the intuitives. Intuitives tend to be elitist and look down on the sensing types, while the sensing types tend to think of the intuitives as airheads sometimes. And you can even see in this entire chart that intuition and sensing is it's dichotomous, essentially. So that all the intuitives. Can I increase the font size on the notepad? Can I? Format? Font? Yes, I can. Let's go 28. Ooh, that might be too big. I don't want to cover the house. Oh. Notepad is such a sketch program, man. There we go. How's that? I think it could work as long as I just do it like this. Notepad++. I could just use a word, but yeah. So NTs can get along in the NT level, but might struggle due to functions INTP, INTJ. And that's one thing that I think tends to get overlooked is when we have friends who are the same temperament as us, it can be easy to communicate with them even if they're on that other function temperament. So remember, NTPs and NTJs are extremely different too. They're two dichotomous function temperament types. And what you could find is that, again, friendships good, relationships often tend to be more difficult. Now, it can be even more difficult when you flip the function temperament and the dichotomy temperament. So for an INTJ, that means SFJs. So function temperament and dichotomy temperament. Am I spelling temperament right? There's no spell check on Notepad. So that would be INTJ and, or let me just say NTJ and SFJ. Not NT, not NITE. Yeah. So the struggles that the SFJs and the NTJs often face, and remember, this applies to any type, just, flip the temperament. I'm just using INTJ as an example because it's the easiest. So the NTJ and the SFJ are going to, on average, really struggle because not only do they not have the same functions, they also have not even the temperamental similarities. So they're going to really struggle to appreciate the same things in life. Now, again, this is something that can actually be really attractive to some people. And you see these types of attractions the most in things like fiction, movies, these sorts of things. And why is that? Because it is romanticized. It is something that is actually not that realistic when you look at the data. When you look at what actually tends to happen in life and the relationships that people tend to get in. We see the outliers as representatives of almost like ideal relationships in a lot of cases. So, maybe the NTJ and the SFJ get into relationships. Maybe the NTP and the goodness, I'm having a stroke here. NTP and the seizure, SFP, excuse me, goodness. The NTP and the SFP might get in a relationship, but they would also struggle. And it's because, remember, no temperamental similarities, no function similarities. Can they be really healthy friendships? Yes, I think they can be. Because then you'll have somebody who points out to you the things that you're missing and why those are important. One of the I wouldn't say it's a friend, but an acquaintance I had that was really important to me personally was an STJ I met one time, an ESTJ. And he talked real hard, no soft facts to me. He would just, if I messed up on something, he would tell me. Or if I did something wrong, he would just, he would tell me. There was no cushioning to it. And that was really, it hurts your ego a little because you're like, oh man, someone's pointing out these things that I'm not being aware of in the SI realm. But it's really important for growth to be able to recognize the things that you can't even see in life. So as an NTJ, you have no awareness of what the SFJ's experience is like or how they're experiencing life because they're so extremely different from you in terms of at least functional preferences. So again, you have the dichotomy preferences, which can cause a struggle. You have the function temperaments, which can cause a struggle, and then you can have both of these, which can cause an even greater struggle together. Now, let's talk about similarities that aren't actually... Sonny's like, hey, came from YouTube post, glad to be here. Thanks for stopping into the stream. I hope you able to find some insight. We're talking about relationships and compatibility. You might have to watch a little bit earlier to catch up on where we're at now, but I'll try not to be too confusing. So let's talk about relationship aspects that people overlook and why certain types tend to be known as good pairs for each other. So when we think about INTJs, what's the meme type that INTJs get along with? There's a type that's it's always memed. You know, why do they get along with the other? Well, it's the INTJ. Yep, you got it right. And the ENFP. No, not ENFP. No, ESF. ENFP. There we go. So let's think about for a second why these two types get along well. There's got to be a reason for the a method to this madness sort of thing. Well, if you don't get it, I can explain it to you now. And I personally, ENFPs I would say are my favorite type. I've had a mentor who was an ENFP. My college mentor, the one that I worked under, was an ENFP. For me, there's something there, and I'll tell you on a function level why these types tend to get along. So what do these two types have in common? Well, they're intuitive. Intuitive types. Okay, well, that makes sense. Not only are they intuitive types, they're intuitive doms. They both are intuitive dominant types. They lead with an intuition function. You don't get the attraction yet. Well, that's fine. Remember, we're just talking about general tendencies here. So if you're not personally attracted to ENFPs, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Talking about the general tendencies here. So the INTJ, ENFP, both are intuitive types. Both are intuitive dominant types. What else do they have in common? What else is in common for these types? Well, both have TE and FI as valued functions. Right, exactly, TE. So what does this mean? How does this play out in these types' attraction towards each other? Well, both of them are intuitive types, which means they're both very likely to get along with each other in terms of just the general intuition. But ENFPs have expansive intuition. Well, sorry, let me define that. ENFP. Expansive intuition, while INTJ has, what's the right word here? It's not restricting. It's refining slash focused. Refining slash focused. And maybe I'll put that on your line. Expansive is the new term for you. Yeah, it's expanding. It goes outwards. So why is that interesting for these two types, and what makes this typically go well? Well, the ENFP is going to have lots and lots of ideas, and the INTJ is able to pick the one or two ideas that I think stands out among those and spend a lot of time refining that while getting continuous feedback from the ENFP on the idea, why it matters, why it's important. Now, as both types build their ideas, they share these same FI values for those ideas. So not only do they have a complementary intuition styles, they share the same FI values for those ideas. Well, if they share the same FI values. If they don't share the same FI values, then you're going to see conflict there. Or you're at least going to see like a disinterest in wanting to communicate those ideas. But ENFPs and INTJs who get along well usually have some sort of shared FI kind of approach to life. So as both types build their ideas, they share the same FI values for those ideas, and therefore they're not going to be trying to critique each other on that specific realm. And what do I mean by that? Let's look at contrast here. So contrast. ENTP. One letter off, right? ENTPs are only one letter off. ENTPs have expansive intuition, which is in common, right? But they have refining thinking. And the difference here is that as soon as these intuitions tend to go into the realm of thinking, as soon as intuitive ideas tend to go into the realm of thinking, NTPs stop to analyze or critique. Is this a bad thing? No, but it's what they do. It's what NTPs naturally do. Now, if you go back to the NFPs, TE implementation. Why are the INTJ and the ENFP going to get along? Because they're both the intuitive dominant types who are the most likely to be very quick in their actions. They're the fastest to implement some sort of idea, given the chance. Especially the ENFPs. So ENFPs have NE, TE conscious valuing. They have conscious NE and TE. That's a dangerous pair if you think about it. Like that means they're going to be putting things into place, acting all the time. ENTPs tend to be very idea driven, and they're active, and they're very intelligent, but they're usually not as likely to want to immediately act upon these things, as they would rather analyze their NE, analyze their ideas, and not put so much of it into direct extroverted thinking action. Whereas with ENFPs, it's I have an idea, let's do it. I have an let's do it right now. Let's go. Let's do the thing right now. I want to understand it. I want to find it out. I want to use it. These sorts of things. Just how the ENTP says, I have an idea. Let me research it. Let me understand it. And the INTJ is extremely similar to the ENFP in that they both want to have ideas. They both want to develop ideas. And then they both want to quickly act upon those ideas. And they're also not going to stop and try and criticize the other person for their TI understanding of that idea. So there's this very natural flow in personality of why these two types get along. So this doesn't just apply to the NTJ and the SFP, though, or the NTJ and the NFP, excuse me. It also applies to the STJ and the SFPs, or the ISTJ, the ESFP, for example. It applies to all those types who have the same type of relationship with each other in some sense. It can apply to maybe even the... It gets weird when you start looking at some of the other axes. So, for example, like ESTJs have TE, but TE can also get really annoyed by, say, for example, what would be the ESTJ's complementary relationship? They would be something with introverted thinking. So, ISTP maybe. No, it would be the INTP. Right? Because then they would have opposite dominant thinking. Right, so extroverted thinking, introverted thinking, and then they would have similar secondary function axes. So the ESTJ INTP, right, okay. That got confusing for me very quickly. It gets weird as you apply this theory outwards, as you try to make it work with other... I don't think this one's right. I got it mixed up here. But I'll come back to that in a second. So it gets difficult. Not every type is going to have this type of relationship with the other types. And especially it's more present, I would say, in the irrational or perceiving dominant types. Why? Why is this type of relationship, the ENFP, INTJ type of relationship, more... it gets weird when you flip judging and perceiving functions. Yeah. It's the same for these ones because they're both perceiving dominant types, which means they're both irrational dominant types, which means they're both not super, look at my technical terms quick, to come to conclusions about their thoughts. Let me say definite conclusions about their thoughts. Neither of these types are likely to come to definite conclusions about their thoughts. Now, this is difficult when you have, say, for example, the ESTJ, who is a thinking dominant, so TE, and say, for example, INTP. All right, let's do ISTP just for this example, who has TI, both rational. They're both rationals. Both want to come to definite conclusions, but their conclusions are in opposite directions. So this is the problem you're going to have when you have rational dominants who have opposing dominant functions as opposed to irrational dominant functions. With irrationals, INTJs, ENFPs, you have types who are not terribly decided and want to continuously take in information. Information gathering and exploration is what we see in the perceiving types, Where with judging types, you don't see information gathering for the sake of perception alone, for the sake of just taking in the information, except for maybe with TI, who wants to analyze. But the reason TI wants to analyze is because they want to come to a conclusion. They want to find a decision. They want to have some sort of decision. So when TE and TI come to oppositional conclusions, it's difficult. It's not something that's terribly easy, because they how do you overcome those differences? TE and TI fundamentally come to different definite conclusions on the information that they're usually approaching, even if they have relatively similar perceiving axes like the INTP. So both of these types share thinking dominant, and both of them have SI valuing or an NE valuing, but they still are going to struggle. They're still going to have some issues because of the definite nature of their of what they want to come to with their conclusions. So how do the rational dominants find relationships then? Like, what's the advice? It's so easy for the perceiving dominants, right? If you're a perceiving dominant, you just want to find someone who's also a perceiving dominant type. It'll work out probably, right? Well, I mean, that's the easy answer, but it gets a little more difficult, because with the rational dominant types, they usually do get along with other rational dominant types, but it's not going to be in the same manner that you would find with the perceiving types, where you want to have the same type of thing going on. With rational dominant types, you often find that it's the rational with the flipped version of the flipped function of their dominant. So with ENTJs, who do they naturally tend to get along with? If you know the memes, INFPs. Why do ENTJs and INFPs get along? They have complementary, I don't know if I'm spelling that right. Whatever. Complementary judging functions. I cannot type to save my life today. Judging functions. So ENTJs and INFPs have complementary judging functions. The ENTJ picks up the TE slack. The INFP picks up the FI slack. They both are able to kind of recognize the issues that the other person is facing on a decision level, on that important rational decision level. Now, I think in terms theoretically, ENTJs and ENFPs or INFPs get along well. I actually think personally that ENTJs and ISFPs would be more likely to get along. Here, I'll just put that there. I think that would actually be a more natural pair, would be the ENTJ and the ISFP. And then that you would find that the INFP is probably more attracted to the ESTJ on average, because there's the similar perceiving axis. But that's just my opinion. But all the intuitives out there are going, no, I'm an ENTJ and I want an INFP because they're intuitive. And I would say, well, I don't actually think that you... My opinion would be that if you found an ISFP that you liked, you might actually see different, because you would find less frustration on the intuition level. Your SE and NI would be able to very naturally mess with each other, most likely. Because you're both going to be very decided on your rational axes. So you can see here that there's this very clear distinction between why perceiving dominant types and rational dominant types might be inclined to develop friendships or relationships with each other. It's because they're both seeking complementary things for each other. With the perceiving dominant types, they're often looking for someone who can help build up or expand their perceiving function. I want to take in information. What function is going to be the most supportive for me for taking in information or exploring the things that are interesting to me? For SI, it's SE. For NI, it's NE, because these types are going to be able to show them a different side of things. With judging dominant types, there's usually a desire to get along with and fundamentally agree with people on some sort of level. TE DOMs and FI DOMs share TE-FI values very strongly, because remember, your repressed function isn't unvalued in the same way, it's just repressed. It's something that's a part of you that's not as easily recognizable. It's something that you probably actually have a strong preference for, you just don't know you have that preference for it, and you're unable to actively view it in your daily life. So ENTJs often have very strong FI, it's just very not in control. Just as INFPs often have a strong desire for TE, they're just usually not the best at manifesting that desire. To give an example of this, INFPs are very likely to start their own businesses and then maybe fall through with it once they realize how much TE type of processing is involved in something like starting a business. You have two friends, INFP and ENTJ, who get along pretty well, but sometimes my INFP doesn't like the bluntness of the TE. Yeah, and that can definitely be the issue. That's going to be where they clash. I would actually say, and this is one of the things that I genuinely believe, that if the ENTJ found an ISFP, that bluntness might actually be something that's a little less mistook. So what causes bluntness is a difficult thing to think about, because there's a few different ways we can look at it. TE is obviously going to be very blunt. I think TESI, the ESTJ, is the most naturally masculine of all the types. It's going to be extremely blunt. But if you look at ISFPs compared to INFPs, which one of these types is more blunt and more okay with being blunt? It's the ISFP. INFPs have a natural tendency to beat around the bush a little bit, and it's because they intuitively know how to navigate through situations. They intuitively understand how to, not manipulate, but deal with the variables of social communication, at least in some manner. ISFPs with lower NI don't value this. They don't have any interest in this, and therefore they come off as very blunt. But at the same time, they don't care if other people are blunt back, which is why ENTJs and ISFPs can get along very well, because they can both be extremely blunt with each other. And they're going to share that value for the TEFI and the perception axis values. The ESTJ and the INFP is a weird one, because I think the ESTJ is extremely blunt on average, which can be off-putting for the INFP. But usually if an ESTJ and an INFP get together, the ESTJ kind of reels in their bluntness for the INFP. It's usually more so a kind of protector role that the ESTJ likes to take in reference to the INFP. But again, that's going into the specifics. I don't want to spend too much time on the specifics. I'd rather talk about the general kind of theories here. So I want to briefly go over the kind of general things that we've been talking about just to catch anyone up. So the first thing we talked about was the type house and how types who are closer to each other in the house are more likely naturally able to get along well with, and remember, these are just general trends. So the first things we talked about was middle two temperaments. So like NTs, for example. NTs in general are going to generally get along pretty well with each other until you get to the part where it becomes about function temperament. So say, for example, NTJs and NTPs are going to struggle because despite the fact that they're in the same dichotomy temperament, they're in the complete opposite function temperament, and therefore they're going to struggle because they have interests in the same things but see them from completely different views. Then when you get to the opposite end of that spectrum where you don't share functions or temperament, function or dichotomy temperament, NTJs and SFJs, for example, then you run into some really big struggles. That's when you're going to find some issues in relationships and compatibility. Types that are naturally going to get along well with the perceiving dominant types, it's going to be the type who has the opposite perception function as their dominant, in terms of, say, for example, if you had introverted intuition, you typically get along with someone else who has extroverted intuition, and then that might even be more so supported by if they have the same secondary axis as you. So INTJs and ENFPs, ISTJs and ESFPs, which is contrasted to the type who doesn't have the same secondary axis, such as the INTJ and the ENTP, who would find that the ENTP is likely going to be too much of a critic of their NI-TE ideals. And then for the rational dominant types, it's the judging functions, the first and the last, that when they're flipped, they tend to be complementary because the other can help take care of it, and they can have a similar value for those things. What about the most similar types, i.e. INTJ and INFJ? So INTJs and INFJs are a weird one, and this applies to a lot of these types of relationships. So let's talk about that. The INTJ/INFJ. They share NI and perception. They share NI. Great, right? Okay, so they have the same dominant function. They're going to be very similar. The issue is, how do they express, well, let's get to that later, actually. What about NI is valued? This is a big thing. This is a big thing. What about NI is valued? What pieces of NI perception are going to be stored as valuable for the INTJ and the INFJ? INTJ, most likely FI. INFJ, most likely TI. Their tertiary function is going to be extremely valuable to them in determining what is important for their intuitions. And then, how do they implement it? How is this NI idea implemented? So for the INTJ, I mean, you could probably guess, right? INTJ T, the INFJ F8. I'm just going to boost these up to save a line of stuff there. So there's a conflict here. There's a conflict in terms of how these types are going to see and value their own ideas, perceptions, thoughts. Does this mean they can't be in a relationship or can't be friends? No, but you can see how there's going to be an issue here. So if the INTJ has strong NI perceptions and they value it on an FI perspective, and then they implement it via extroverted thinking, that means the value axis, the rational judging function axis, is on a different spectrum than the INFJ, which means they're going to have a very hard time coming to terms about how they see the same things. If you had, say, for a theoretical example, you had an INTJ and an INFJ, and they both perceived something in the exact same way. Just the perception. Like they perceived an event and it both inspired an idea within them. Then you, as soon as you take that function, that perception, and you give it to the judging functions, that's your issue. As soon as the perception goes from insight to what does it mean for me and the world around me, as Jung said, then it becomes an issue because TI is going to stop and want to analyze and understand the perception, which is why INFJs often have very extreme, deep understandings of the intuitive perceptions that they take in. Well, with the INTJ, it goes into, well, what does this mean for me? How is this idea important for me? How does it relate to me? What are the things that I want to do with this? Instead of how do I understand this? So then the INTJ takes that, they take that NI-FI understanding. I've seen this perception. How does it apply to me? How can I implement it into the external world in such a way that it leads to the desire that is important for me? Whereas with the INFJ, it's they take this idea, they bring it in to understand it, they deeply analyze it. How can I get it into the world in such a way that it's going to support the FE values and perspectives that I enjoy? How can I gather the people in my society around me to share this understanding that I've cultivated? And this can lead to types who have an issue, or this can lead to relationship issues, and that they might struggle to overcome this. But if there is healthy communication, they can actually be very complementary of each other because they can see both sides of the NI. See both sides of NI. Can I have FI values? What TI, sorry, you misread that. What TI represents. Not as in having TI, but my feelings wanting to be thinking. Well, yeah, as an NT type, especially if you're a younger NT, if you're an NT who's under like 30, you're going to be very T-oriented, which means that your T is going to be battling for supremacy, essentially, over your FI. Younger INTJs especially often have a strong disregard for their FI. They don't want to be seen for their feelings. Remember, the tertiary function is extremely private, which is why INFJs, despite the fact that they have that strong TI value, they actually deeply understand and want to talk about the depths of the topics that they're analyzing, they won't let that interfere with FE. They won't let it interfere with their kind of external representation of what is important to them, because there's a conflict in that area. And these two things can be at ends with each other. So yes, INTJs are often going to want to be seen more as thinking types, despite the fact that FI is generally more valued than TE. TE is a way for NI and FI to get implemented into the world, for the most part. Now remember, a lot of the times what you think is thinking, what you think comes off as thinking, is actually probably just intuition. that has a general interest in the thinking realm. So the external interests of your NI are usually flavored towards your judging function. So that's another thing that I should put on top of this. What about NI is valued? Internally, FI. Externally, TE. Like, what does it mean externally to the world and how people see me, these sorts of things. Whereas for the INFJ, how do people see me? How do the external world see me? It's the FE. So in summary, INTJs and INFJs, and you could even say like ISFJs, ISTJs, can be in relationships with each other. They're just going to struggle because they're both going to be seeing the same thing, and then wanting to do different things about it. Seeing the same things and wanting to do... I'm just going to expand this. Seeing the same thing and then wanting to do different things about it is the general kind of note here. So yes, it is possible. It's just not going to be something that's super easy for these types to overcome because they want to do their own thing when it comes to the perception that they have. For example, I can easily get frustrated with INFJs because of their reluctance to take their perceptions and act on it. Whereas INFJs can get very annoyed with me because of my reluctance to want to stop and analyze the thing that we're talking about. For me, it's like, okay, I get to the point, or I want to get to the point very quickly, and I don't want to spend too much time deep diving into this topic because I have a very strong intuitive understanding of what it means. I understand the perception / meaning of it. Now, how can I apply it? I don't want to stop and TI, rationalize, and analyze these ideas. I want to implement them. I want to do something with them. I want to take them and go with them because my FI says, all right, I understand this and it's important to me. Let's go. Let's take it and go. Now, this also can lead to the INTJ falling into their like NI-FI trap. You know, the NI, we're kind of branching off here. So INTJ, NI-FI trap is very similar to the INFJ, NI-TI existentialist. I don't know if I spelled that right. So INTJs can get stuck in their feelings. Stuck in their feelings, even if they're not expressive about it. INFJs stuck in their world, not worldview, conceptual understandings. This is the trap. This is the trap that these types can fall into. That the INTJ can get stuck in their own feelings and start to analyze their own feelings from a like an NI-FI perspective, whereas the INFJ can get stuck in their own conceptual understandings. It's the reason that the INFJ is the most likely type to fall into existentialism or any sort of thing like that, because they see, the world is, we're just gonna die, and then there's probably no afterlife or whatever, these sorts of things that they start to talk about, and then they really start to dwell on these things, and they can't get out of that trap until they start interacting with the FE environment. So that's just this is a side note. I don't know. This is not about relationships, but that's just a fun fact for the INTJ and the INFJ. All right, so we've covered a lot. So what other relationship dynamics should we talk about? I think those are the primary ones that I think are going to be the most important when it comes to relationships. The dichotomy preferences, the function temperaments. Then you have perceiving dominant types who are more likely to naturally engage with each other, as well, especially in B relationships, where you have judging or rational dominant types who also tend to be more likely. Then you have the smaller differences, like what would an NI dom with another NI dom who's different look like. And this is something that you can generally rationalize or expand out to the other types. So say, for example, INTP and ISTP, who are both TI DOMs. Same TI value, different desires for the TI. Or even a different way of... Yeah, I would say different desires for the TI. Different ways of wanting to analyze or do things with the TI. So the INTP wants to expand on their ideas while ISTP wants to narrow down. And this is why INTPs can be very, interesting, because they can expand out upon their ideas and they can learn many things from different fields. ISTPs tend to be more likely to be drawn towards things like mastery over a single field. So like TINI is very good at like getting good at a single skill, which is why ISTPs tend to be very prone to being like, master engineers or something along that line. It's because they spend all of their time on one thing, and they spend all of their time trying to kind of analyze and understand the one topic that they're really interested in. Whereas the TI, SI, and I mean, it's important to recognize the NE, TI, NI, TI, SE, NI, or versus the TI, NE, SI is exploring and understanding many things. The NTPs tend to be far more prone to want to analyze as much as they can and see the connections between those things so that they can come to a more complete understanding through those connections. Whereas with the ISTP, it's more like I want to really narrow down and try to get a single conceptual understanding of this thing through TI and NI. It's very similar to how INFJs do, except INFJs are more likely to get stuck in the theory aspect and maybe not as much the understanding aspect. Today you learned that you should keep pressing your younger girlfriend INFJ to share her TI thoughts. Yeah, maybe. The TI is going to be important. Remember, if you try to push on that tertiary function too much, there's going to be an issue. So don't push on the tertiary function too much, or you're going to have people struggling to get by. All right, I'm trying to see what other angles do we want to take from discussing relationships. What are two other types that are like likely to maybe get along with that might not be in the normal realm? Types like, say, for example, we already covered like INFJs. Well, for INFJs, it would be extremely similar to this part of the video. So if you're interested in seeing about how INFJ relationships might work, watch this and just switch this with an INFJ and ENTP, because it's the same thing. It's the exact same thing. Whereas they both have expansive intuition, but they both want to refine the same things. Essentially, they value and want to refine the same things. INFJs want to talk about their ideas and they want to TI analyze them, just as ENTPs want to expand on their ideas and then analyze them. And then those two things mesh very well. And the same thing can be even said for many of the sensing types, like the ESFP and the ISTJ. I think I already said that though, didn't I? Yeah, ISTJ, ESFP. So why would the ISTJ and the ESFP get along well? The same reason, because their perceiving functions are interested in the same things and they have the same values associated, or their perceiving functions are different but in the same realm, whereas their judging functions are the same. Those are the main aspects that make up what I think is important when it comes to personality type compatibility. It's not a perfect idea, and remember that there's always going to be outliers. There's always going to be exceptions, and that goes back to what we talked about originally, which is attraction theory. And if you just came into the video now, remember, this is the key takeaway from this video, everyone. This is literally the key takeaway. Personality is a single aspect of attraction. It's a single aspect of relationship. All of these other things can be more important for a relationship, friendship, anything than personality. You can have 4 out of 5 and still have a perfectly happy relationship. And I think that's the thing that people really tend to not understand when they're thinking about personality type, compatibility, friendships, is that as long as you have those other things, you can just as easily come to good relationships and friendships with other people. Thunder Anima says, when I talk to other NI DOMs, I notice the conversation flows very naturally and we connect on a very deep level in a way I don't find with other types. Do you experience this as well? It's like we think the same. I notice this when I talk to INTJs. INFJs can, I feel like we're talking on the same level, but then I also feel like there's this stopping aspect. And it's the analogy I always use with TE and TI, where it's like TE wants to get in the car and get to the destination, whereas TI doesn't want to even get in the car and turn it on until they've understood how the car works. And that's the problem I have with other NI DOMs, is that while we can be very interested, I think it's like we're coming to different conclusions. Well, we literally are. Our rational decisions about our perceptions are different. So it can be very easy to be talking about something and then diverge a little bit. With other INTJs, you're literally just talking to like other versions of yourself. So yeah, it makes sense. That's another thing we could talk about. Is before we kind of start to close, is that what types are same type relationships. So same type relationships. What are the benefits and what are the, I can't type, pros and cons. What are the pros and cons? Well, with same type relationships, I mean, you see things in the same way. Often have very similar interests, hobbies, and life goals. What are some downsides to same type relationships? Very little room for psychological growth. This is a big issue with just the other person. And what do I mean with just the other person? This is important for me to make a distinction here. What do I mean by just the other person? Because you don't need to have your psychological growth from your romantic partner. It's just like, you shouldn't expect your romantic partner or friend to be the only person you need in your life, because if that's the case, you're not going to grow psychologically. It's the reason why it's recommended for people who are in like deep relationships with one another to have friends outside of the relationship so you can grow and become someone who sees things from many different perspectives. If you're in a same type relationship with someone, you value the same things, you come to very similar conclusions, and there's not going to be much room for mental growth there. You're not pushing each other's boundaries, and neither of you are able to see your blind spots. Can't see blind spots. And this is going to be a big issue for types who are the same type, because they can't see the blind spots. So you're both very likely to fall into the same stresses. Just as you're both very likely to be motivated and excited by the same things, you're both likely to fall into states where it's like, well, we've hit a road or a block in the road, and I don't know what to do about it. And then both of you are just going to be like, well, I don't know, like how, whatever. Not exactly sure what to do here. So that's the biggest issue with same type relationships. It can work as long as you have other people in your life who are able to help you grow psychologically or can help you through those types of issues. As long as you have other people who you can reference to help you out of these blind spot issues. Because even if you're a type like an INTJ and you're like the most independent person in the world, you're going to have blind spots, which is why I love ENFP so much. I love ENFPs. I like ENFP so much because they are the ones who can help me get out of a rut most often. If I'm having trouble imagining something or, coming up with an idea, and it's because my NI tunnel vision won't let me see things in a way that's representative enough of what I'm looking for, trying to achieve or solve. And then their expansive NE with the same TEFI values helps me understand what it is that I'm missing in my situation. Now, it can be useful to have someone like an ENTP, for example, if you're an INTJ, because they're going to be on that completely different spectrum. And it's going to be, what am I saying? It's going to be helpful, but it's going to be annoying because they're going to expand and then criticize. So it's going to be helpful and annoying. ENFJ, what am I a joke to you? Yeah, so that just goes back to the idea that, like, as I said, all this whole notepad, all these notes is within the aspect of personality. So even if your personality isn't completely compatible, you're gonna be fine as long as you have enough in common. You have enough interest in one another. There's other things that define and make up the relationship. Because you can get personality needs or personality psychological growth from other people in life. That doesn't have to be something you get from a romantic partner or like a friend. You can have a friend who you're just friends with because you're very similar and you have the same subculture, even if they have an extremely different personality. Or you can be friends with somebody because they have an extremely similar personality, even though they're very different from you in terms of culture and subculture. It's just going to be, what are the aspects that you have with other people that create a stable relationship? Now, what people tend to think of as the ideal relationship, quote unquote ideal, is if you have all 5 factors. And sure, that's true. If you want to meet the perfect person and you want to explore the entire world to just find someone who has literally every single aspect of this, then, fine. But the odds are you're going to be setting your standards to a height that is nearly impossible, because it's just unrealistic to assume that someone is going to be perfect. Like, when you hold people to the expectation of perfect, then you're going to fall into the issue of never being satisfied, which is actually something that is noted with the introverted intuitive dominance in the MBTI statistic manual, particularly the INFJ, who those types were the most likely to be dissatisfied with long-term relationships. Well, why? Because NI dominants are the most likely to have internal idealized versions of what their partner could potentially be, which means it's very easy for them to have imaginary partners, essentially, or imagine what it would be like if their partner was this perfect idealized version. So it's dangerous for NI dominants to get into this state, and I think it's unhealthy for them, and they have to learn how to recognize that humans are humans and humans have flaws. Because most of the times, INTJs and INFJs won't look at themselves and recognize their own flaws, and they don't hold themselves to those same standards that they would expect from somebody else a lot of the times. They do in some degree, in some regards, they're going to hold themselves to the same standards, but they don't. They wouldn't hold themselves to the standards of being absolutely perfect 100% of the time, which is what they hold their other partner to typically, at least in their own mind, which is why it can be frustrating. And as soon as an NI dominant learns to overcome that mental state and realize that you can be in a relationship with people who don't have 100% perfect similarity, proximity, reinforcement, physical attractiveness, and personality comparative to your goals or what you want out of life, you're going to be much happier. You're going to realize that humans are humans, and you're going to be able to grow from that. So it's extremely important. And that doesn't mean lower your standards. It means be real, be realistic about what people are like. Is there a perfect person out there somewhere in the world? Probably. And maybe some people, maybe less than 1% of people find the perfect relationship. But if you spend all of your life looking for perfection, you're most likely just going to be miserable. Because it's unrealistic to think that everybody in the world could just find their perfect partner and match right off the bat. Now, a lot of the times, perfection and what you want in life can change, and that's something that's extremely important to remember. And that's one of the reasons that many people divorce after like 5 or 10 years. If you get married and then 10 years down the road, you've grown and developed into someone who's an entirely different person, you might not be satisfied with your partner anymore. And it's not because they weren't perfect at the time that you started the relationship. All of these things could have been perfect when you became friends with or developed into a relationship with someone. But down the road, as you developed into a more mature or less mature version of yourself, maybe 1 or 2 of these things fell out of line. Maybe your subculture changed. Maybe, you were a goth kid and you got older and you got a job and you realized that that's childish and you don't want to deal with that anymore. I'm not saying it is. I'm just saying maybe that's how you think. And maybe your partner still holds strongly onto that identity, and this person says, well, grow up. And this person says, well, no, I'm being me. And then they split because over the course of 5 or 10 years, that similarity then became a difference, which then became something that tore apart a relationship or friendship. Something you need to work on. I also relate to having idealized versions of a partner in my head that may not be guaranteed to happen. Yes, especially if you're young. Young NI dominants, especially up to like 20, well, even up to their 30s if they're not careful. I'm guilty of it even now myself. The difference is that your mind is going to do that either way. Your mind is gonna have this idealized version of what a partner could be. Recognizing what that means and making a decision based off of that is what's important. And realizing that, humans are humans. It's just like, it comes back to the idea of wisdom, right? And how Jordan Peterson and many other people in life have said the idea that you can learn at least something from almost anyone, or everyone in the world has at least something valuable to say. The same kind of logic and general reasoning can be applied to relationships, and that almost everyone that you are interested in from a romantic perspective is going to have some redeeming qualities or something about them that you like or you enjoy. But that doesn't mean that they have to be perfect. They don't have to be perfect, just like you aren't perfect. And the odds are, what if the person that you were interested in held you to the exact same standard? So imagine you had in your mind a perfect partner, and then you found that perfect partner, and you went, yes, this is amazing, this is fantastic, this is the perfect partner. And then you said, okay, I can be in a relationship with this person, but in theory, I would also have to be the perfect partner for this person. What are the odds of that in terms of relationships? It's almost nothing. It's it just doesn't happen, right? Like, because if you find someone who is extremely perfect to you, you would also have to be extremely perfect to them, and the odds of that happening, it's just not realistic. And it's just why people have to realize that there's so much more than just like personality, for example, that is perfect. I feel at least lately people have been marrying for the wrong reasons, too focused on just physical attraction alone, which eventually goes away. All that's left is the personality connection, which wasn't focused on earlier. So yeah, and you'll find over time that like you know, some things fall in and out of importance in terms of society and culture. You know, you go look at older civilizations and things like physical attractiveness was the thing that was most important in females, and it's still very important in females as compared to men in a lot of cultures, as opposed to like personality. For example, men in older societies didn't pick women because of their personality; they picked them because of their physical attractiveness, because there was a different relationship dynamic going on for much of history. And then as women became, as the women gained more power, Jenny Lux donated 10. What struggle? Oh, there's the mini feed. Can I change that? Did I miss anything? Just making sure I didn't miss any like donations or chats. Okay, no. So Jenny Lux said, "What is the struggle in an INTJ and ENFP relationship might come across? Blind spots to the complete different sides of functions." And what I mean by that is sensing. They are both going to struggle heavily in the sensing realm, getting things done in terms of details, making sure that things are taken care of. INTJ, ENFP struggle. So yeah, despite the fact that they are a very good relationship partner, let's talk about some of the struggle areas they might face. Both have repressed sensing. This is a big one. I mean, who's going to do the paperwork, right? Who's going to do taxes? Who is going to take the dog out for a walk every single day? Who's going to do the little things? Who's going to take care of all these things? That is going to be a huge issue for the INTJ and the ENFP because both of them have respected or disrespected and ignored sensing. Neither one of them wants to take care of the little things in life. So there's going to be extremely high highs in intuition and low lows in sensing. You're very likely to argue over things like who has to do the cleaning or who has to do the little things, or at least you're going to be very frustrated because you're both going to be ignorant. Either that or you're just going to like live in disarray because of these things. The INTJ might naturally want to organize these things a little bit more than the ENFP, but it's still going to be extremely frustrating to them. So those are going to be the key issues. And how can you overcome that? Well, you would overcome that by making some sort of not contractual, but a pseudo contractual agreement between people to divide these responsibilities into something that's fair between both parties. So essentially, you both have to recognize, well, all right, you do these things and I'll do these things, and then we're both going to be frustrated, but we can be the least frustrated as possible. You want to minimize the damage that's being done because of your lack of sensing. Those are going to be the issues. So what else can be an issue? The ENFP might expect more feeling from the INTJ, more expressed feelings. Despite the fact that ENFPs are introverted feeling types, because they have extroverted intuition, they're going to be more expressive than your average, the other types, essentially. Like just how ESFPs tend to be expressive. But with ENFPs, it's almost like they're pseudo-emotionally expressive. What do I mean by that? It means they're pretending to be emotionally expressive. It's not that they're actually showing emotions. It's that their extroverted perception and communication style is energetic and motivated by introverted feeling. So they're showing excitement, they're showing interest, they're showing interaction, and this comes off as emotional. And it's not exactly the same. But ENFPs often want to see other people's emotional states so they can understand them, so they can try to like FI analyze. Just how TI, think of it like this, just how TI wants to analyze and understand things from an intellectual level, FI can very much want to analyze and understand things from an emotional level. So the ENFP can want to try and get into the INTJ's little feeling box and go, okay, what is he feeling? I want to know what he's feeling. How can I understand this feeling? Meanwhile, INTJs who have no interest in letting anyone into their FI because it's very shy, it's tertiary, it's not something that they want to talk about, they're not going to let you near it. And unless they're like really comfortable with you and there's a special exception. That could be very frustrating for the ENFP. Just how the INTJ might look down on the ENFP's TE occasionally. So I don't know if I'm spelling this right, but whatever. So they're both valued. They both value the TE, right? But the INTJ might look down on the ENFP's TE occasionally. Why aren't you more organized? Why aren't you keeping up with the stuff? I don't understand how you didn't see that the plan right there was easy. Like, I don't understand. That's the same thing that you're going to see in terms of that relationship there. Thunder says, the fact that I repress sensing makes me want to have a partner that is higher in sensing, or at least focused on organizing external environment and atmosphere. And EJ, yes, Thunder. So let me tell you an interesting fact. Why do I like being with an ENFJ as a romantic partner? Because they have conscious extroverted feeling and extroverted sensing. She takes care of everything in the sensing world. It is organized for the most part. I mean, I have to do like the occasional thing like taxes or whatever, but like when it comes to like daily cleaning, I don't even have to think about it because the house is upkept. She takes care of the SE. That our external environment is organized because she's an EJ with conscious SE. ENTJs and ENFJs are great at this. They want their external environment to be organized, but they don't do it to the degree that the ESJs tend to. So what does that mean? Well, the ESJs have an extremely like organized environment, but it's like detail focused organized. I don't know how to exactly express what I'm thinking here, but their way of organizing is much more like almost bureaucratic in nature. There's much more of a method to it, whereas with the ENJs it's much more like, oh, it looks good. It doesn't have to have a method as long as it is visually pleasing to me, and that's something it's been beneficial for me being with an ENFJ as a partner, because she takes care of a lot of the SE type of things that are extremely frustrating to me. Yeah, it's just those little things, like the daily in and outs of life, because the conscious SE. Where was I going? I was talking about ENFPs and INTJs. I think we covered most of that. Okay. So we've talked for almost an hour and a half now, and that's the main lecture that I have for today. So that's the lecture on attraction theory, personality types. Biggest takeaway is that personality is a single aspect of attraction. Personality is a single aspect of attraction. So within this aspect is all of the stuff that I talked about today that could potentially lead to something close to a friendship or relationship, and it is not the most important thing. Actually, one thing I want to talk about, just like love languages, just like love styles, each person is going to have a different preference for which one of these things is the most important for them. For some people, personality might be your golden factor. It might be the single most important thing. I would say that most people have one of these that's like very important to them. And you might say, well, how is like proximity super close? Well, someone who wouldn't do a distance relationship, for example, might have proximity very, very highly ranked in their relationship. But also, you could get into an even deeper look and say that someone who wants to have high proximity with their partner means they want to spend an extreme amount of time with their partner. They don't want their partner to be far from them very often. They're not going to like it when their partner travels. They're not going to like it when their partner goes away. They want to stay very close in general proximity most of the time. And each person can have a general one of these traits that is important to them. And for some, it might be personality. And I think personality is the one that we think of as being the most important. And I think for many people, it's not. It's just not the most important thing compared to some of the other ones. It just is what we think of as being the most important. We have an ESTP dad, and he trains me a lot in the sensing aspect, so I feel I've gotten better, but it's still something that's such a drag to deal with. But at the same time, I have the fear of being incapable or unprepared to face the world as an adult, so I take this feedback and knowledge. Right, and that's the most important thing. If an ST gives you an advice as an NT, it hurts, but take it. Take that advice and do something with it, because a lot of the times it's meaningful. A lot of the times if they have something to say to you, even though it hurts, it's going to be extremely useful to you. And that is an extremely important lesson to learn if you're an NT. Is recognize what those STs have to say, because they might not see what you're trying to explain to them, but you're also not seeing something. It's not just that, oh, they can't see my perceptions. They can't understand what I'm seeing. You can't see what they're seeing. You can't. It's just how it works. It's a double street. It's not that intuitives are superior to sensing types. It's that you can't see what they're seeing. You're blind to it. And it's important for intuitives to recognize that. All right, so let's switch over now into kind of a little Q&A. We'll do this for a few minutes, like maybe 5-10 minutes, and then I'll wrap up the the video. So now would be a good time to ask questions if you're a viewer and you want to know something about relationships, MBTI types, personality, these sorts of things. Now's the time for that. I will leave this as an open slot for about 2 or 3 minutes, and if I don't get any questions, then I'll wrap up, but I'd be more than happy to answer some questions. So let me know what you're thinking. Let me check my phone real quick. Speaking of the wife, she texted me. Okay. I'm not seeing any questions so far. I'll wait a little bit longer. Also, hello, and thank you everyone who's here. I see there's 14 people in the stream. I really appreciate everyone dropping into the stream. This video will be on YouTube as well tomorrow. The Monday streams are usually the more formal streams. Sometimes I do weekend streams. I haven't the past 2 weekends because my sleep schedule's just been messed up. Like, it's just been not good. And I just haven't had the energy. I slept for like 10 hours last night, and that was nice. For the first time in a long while, I slept for a good time, which is why I've got some speaking energy today. So I'm not seeing any other questions right now. Come on, where's the ENPs? Jenny, I know you're there. Give me a question. No, I'm just kidding. Give me those sweet questions. Hey, YouTube. Yeah. All right. Well, I'm going to go for exactly 1 more minute. If I don't get another question in the next minute, I'm going to wrap up. Because I don't have anything else to say on this particular topic. I think we covered a lot of ground today. I hope this was helpful to people out there. I hope people got some insight to this and they were able to understand maybe the importance and sometimes unimportance of personality and personality type when it comes to compatibility and relationships, these sorts of things. I hope people are able to see my points of view. Remember, my points of view aren't law. This is just kind of what I think is the general trend for compatibility in relationships. Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up. Thanks, everyone. It was a pleasure speaking with you all today. Thank you for stopping into the stream. You can catch this re-uploaded to YouTube tomorrow if you're interested in seeing the first half if you joined late. I hope you all have yourselves a great day, and I will see you later. Bye-bye.